Watch, Mark, we've got a huge ruling that we have been waiting for. We've just found out from the trial court in California that Donald Trump's troop deployment was illegal. And so, first and foremost, because we've been talking about this a lot in terms of how the California deployment can relate to the other states. Obviously, Trump is trying to deploy troops into New York and Chicago and Baltimore. And you and I have spoken at length about the prospect of him deploying troops into places like Atlanta, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia as we get closer to the election. But how does the ruling here in California impact the prospect of further deployments across the country?
Yeah, look, this one's for all the marbles, and kudos to Gavin Newsom and the state of California for really, betting big and going big and coming out a winner at the other end of this. I mean, you and I talked about the risks of bringing this case and the rewards of doing so. And so you point out that not only did the state of California win this case, did Gavin Newsom as a named plaintiff win this case, but that it could be for all the marbles in these other states. I mean, this is going to be an influential decision by this district court judge. It is only a district court judge in California, but an influential decision that says the president of the United States, Donald Trump, may not create a national police force out of the military and use the military in these cities effectively as his own police force. That violates the Posse Comitatus Act, which is a longstanding statute that prohibits the deployment of U.S. military in order to perform policing functions. But I need everyone to do me a favor, and I need you to watch until the end of this video because we're going to explain everything about this and what you can do to fight back. So stay with me here.
Mark, is there any chance that Trump could look at his loss here and say, okay, we're not going to deploy troops to other places under the same pretext that we did it in California. We're going to try to do it under a completely different pretext because that one isn't going to work for us?
Look, it is always possible that Donald Trump will evolve his tactics. And we need to be, clear-eyed about this. The fact is that one victory in one court in one state doesn't mean that Donald Trump is going to stop trying to be an authoritarian, right? That is his playbook is to be a dictator. His playbook is to deploy these troops. And he has, after this loss in California, already said he's going to do this in other places. So he has a couple of options. Number one, as you point out, he could just eat the loss in California and say, I will use a different theory, or I will have the troops doing different things. I will have them doing less police-like things. I mean, sadly, we've all seen the images in Washington, D.C. where they are mulching, which is, an absolute disgrace what Donald Trump has going on there. But, you could have them performing non-police-like functions, and then that would take this one theory off the table. Now, it doesn't mean that there are not other theories to prevent Donald Trump from doing what he wants, but it is possible he evolves his tactics. But, Brian, one of the things we have seen over and over again with this Department of Justice is that nobody in the Department of Justice seems to have the spine to go to Donald Trump and say, hey, boss, we can't do the thing the way you want it done, so let's do it this other way. Instead, what they're more likely to do is to say, nope, the judge is wrong. We can do that. We can have a national police force. We can deploy the U.S. military domestically, notwithstanding what the federal law says, because we don't think federal law applies to the president. And so it would not surprise me if they don't change tactics, but instead appeal this ruling and then, litigate this in other states where they move forward.
How confident do you feel in the prospect of an appeal? Because on one hand, if the Trump administration appeals this and they win, then obviously that's a big victory for them, and it undermines the ability for, the pro-democracy forces out there to be able to say, you can't do this in all of these other states in very much the same way that you couldn't do this in California. But on the flip side, if they do appeal this and they lose yet again in the Ninth Circuit, well, now there's precedent that other courts can point to and say, look, it didn't work there. Not only is your legal framework lacking, but there is legal precedent to be able to push back against what you're doing. And so based on that precedent, we also can't allow you to deploy troops to Detroit, Milwaukee, and Philly, and Atlanta, and so on. So where do you think, how confident do you feel in terms of the prospect of an appeal?
Look, this is very high stakes stuff. I mean, like I said, you and I talked about this, about the stakes for Governor Newsom in bringing this case.
Yeah.
And remember, he won a preliminary injunction, then that got reversed on appeal in the Ninth Circuit, and then he plowed forward with this trial. And kudos to him and the lawyers in the Attorney General's office, AG Bonta's folks who put on a very, very compelling case that convinced this judge. So that's where we stand today. Now, bringing it to the Court of Appeals is high risk, high reward for the administration. As you point out, if they lose there, then they have now created a much higher, steeper mountain for them. On the other hand, if they win there, then they have created precedent that will make it harder, not impossible, for Democratic governors elsewhere to fight back. And then, of course, the big question is, if it does go to the Ninth Circuit, whoever loses, do they then take it to the U.S. Supreme Court? Because that's obviously the biggest stakes. And eventually, the Supreme Court is going to have to sort these cases out. And if you are someone who wants to stay informed on all of that, please subscribe to this channel right now. Click the subscribe button. It is sitting right in front of you. And also hit the bell to make sure that when Brian and I post other videos on this topic and everything involving democracy, you are alerted.
Well, I appreciate that. And to that exact point, for folks who are looking to stay on top of this stuff, I've been getting all my news as it relates to everything happening in these courts in California, on this case in particular, from Democracy Docket, which is the news outlet Marc founded to focus on everything voting in elections. If you are not yet signed up and you want to support fearless, independent journalism, there is no better outlet than Democracy Docket. So I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Marc, do you have any worry that a trial court, when Newsom requested that initial preliminary injunction barring the troops from coming into Los Angeles, the trial court granted it to him, but then the Ninth Circuit reversed it. Here we're in a not dissimilar situation where Newsom won at the trial court on the merits, and now in the prospect of it going up to the Ninth Circuit, we could be facing a similar scenario. And so how worrisome is that prospect for you?
Look, you never take anything for granted. And, my job as a lawyer is to worry about everything. And I am sure the lawyers for the governor and the AG's office are worried about everything as well. But there are some reasons for optimism. And the biggest one is that the posture of cases matters a lot. Okay. So it is one thing for a state to go into a judge on an emergency basis and say, we need a preliminary injunction. At that point, the burden on the state to prove not just that they are right, but that they are convincingly right, and that they will suffer the irreparable harm if the status quo is that the troops stay. Okay, the thing about preliminary injunctions is very oftentimes what it boils down to is what should the status quo be while the case proceeds? Where is the harm? Is the harm better off with the troops staying? And then if the case goes against Trump, they leave, or is the status quo better that they leave, and then if Trump wins, they come back? And so the Ninth Circuit, I thought wrongly, reversed the trial court, but it did so on that very deferential standard to the government, and also without an evidentiary record, right? Because you're not going to have a full evidentiary record for a preliminary injunction in a case like that, in a case like this. But now, after a trial, it's very, very different, because now what there are is findings of fact and conclusions of law. And what the judge found as a matter of fact is that Donald Trump deployed these members of the military to be a national police force. That is not a speculation at this point. That is a fact found by the judge. The judge also found, as a matter of fact, that they did in fact perform police functions when they were deployed. That is a matter of fact. And the reason why that is so important is that when facts are decided as a matter of by a trial court, they are entitled to great deference unless they are clearly erroneous. That's the test. Unless they are clearly erroneous, the Court of Appeals has to accept those facts. So the Ninth Circuit, looking at this, no longer can look at sort of a blank piece of paper like they were the first time. Instead, now they're saying, okay, we have to accept as a given that these folks were deployed to be a national police force and that they were performing police functions. It is very difficult to see how that gets reversed at the Ninth Circuit, unless the California really draws a very unusual panel of the Ninth Circuit. Supreme Court, always a more complicated place.
Right. Mark, at the end of the line with all of this, the thing that I'm always thinking about is how we can exploit this kind of scheme to be able to deploy troops into the states. That's always my thought in terms of any troop deployment is normalizing us to this idea and getting legal normalization as well. And so how could Trump look at this, see where he went wrong, and try to fix it as we head toward the 2026 election?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say for everyone watching, what Brian is saying needs to be accepted as the factual premise. Okay, why do I say that? Because there is still, unfortunately, a debate going on within the pro-democracy coalition that, in my view, is going to become outcome determinative, likely, to the 2026 election. Where you fall on this is answered by whether or not you believe, as Brian just said, that Donald Trump is using the military to take over or to interfere in the 2026 elections. I believe that is true. Brian believes that's true. But I want to take a second to just make sure everyone watching this video understands how that is actually what Donald Trump is up to. And if you don't understand that as what is driving so much of what he's doing, then frankly, you don't fully understand why he seems to be finding a scattered shot theory here and a scattered shot theory there, right? Because like when Brian, when you say like, what if he comes up with a different theory or is there a way you can improve it? You have to ask yourself towards what end? Like, why would he want to have the troops there, right? Like if he can't use them as a police force, then what does he want them for? And I believe, as your question assumes, that it is in part to have them in place for the 2026 election. Not that elections will be canceled, dictators love elections, but rather he wants them there as a backstop and potentially to interfere. Now, so what other avenues does that open up? Well, I mean, look, he can declare other kinds of emergencies. He can declare an insurrection, right? He can invoke what he believes is his inherent power as president to essentially do whatever he wants. And we hear him say that, like that he's the president and under Article 2 of the Constitution, he essentially can do whatever he wants. Now, I don't think that's going to get him very far in court, but it may get him places in the, not even in the court of public opinion, but in the unwillingness of some elected officials, of some politicians to put up a fight. I mean, we saw Gavin Newsom put up a fight, and kudos to him for bringing this case. We are watching as J.B. Pritzker is preparing to put up a fight, and kudos to him. But are we sure that all of the mayors and all of the governors and all of the places where he is going to want to do this, that they are ready to put up a fight? I don't mean that physical fight, but a legal fight. Are they willing to challenge this, or are we going to see in some places that Democrats will be like, yeah, come on in, right. we'll operate under good faith? And that is really what I worry about more than what his legal theories are.
All right. Well, look, all of that underscores the importance of supporting Marc and his team, elevating his voice. And so if you are not yet subscribed to Democracy Docket, I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. If ever there was an outlet to support right now, this one's it. So again, if you're not yet subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.